Hello, my name is Dr. Yael Cohen-Rimer, and I'm introducing my new paper published in the Journal of Governance and Regulation, Participation in Welfare Legislation, a Poverty-Aware Paradigm. Public participation, responsive regulation, and other policy formulations are intended to draw governments down from their ivory towers and into engagement with the people. However, who are the people? This paper focuses on one neglected group of people, those living in poverty, who not only face hunger, often accompanied by poorer health and lower life expectancy, but whose social exclusion typically goes unrecognized by the authorities. The legal framing of poverty, and as a result, state policy approaches to its alleviation, focuses on the material core, representing a very thin conceptualization that fails to address the social dimensions. Combined with a blatantly hegemonic stance, the resulting ignorance around poverty and the poor generates welfare laws that are woefully out of touch with reality. The legislative thinking that perpetuates, rather elevates, poverty. This paper seeks to make a twofold contribution. One, to demonstrate the situation with an empirical inquiry into the legislative process, juxtaposed against the qualitative field research findings. And two, to introduce the poverty-aware paradigm, constructed in social work discourse, to illuminate and explain the empirical findings, and to point to potential procedural institutional reform to pave the way for poverty-aware legislation. So, in this paper, I present one seemingly small and specific legal clause, the presumed income clause, in the Israeli income supplement law. This clause suggests that people who are applying for income supplement will not be eligible if they own any property. I depict the law from two sides of the legislative fence. One, the legislative process, the legislators enacting the law. They are saying, we will just tell them to sell the property and they will have money. On the other side, people in poverty affected by this presumption in the law. This presumption offers a paradigmatic example of a gap between legislators and people in poverty that is inherent to welfare law, both practically and theoretically. People in poverty are saying, we cannot sell this property. Come live a day in our lives and you will see. Practically, it seems that the legislators and the people in poverty are engaged in a frustrating dead-end debate, legislating from their own limited point of view. The protocols reflect legislators who premise their decision on scenarios that do not exist in reality. Theoretically, the legal scholarship falls short of encapsulating the intricate layered of poverty, addressing only its material core and neglecting its social and relational aspect. The poverty-aware paradigm, relatively recent contribution to the literature constructed by social work professor Yael Cohen-Rimer, originally used in social work scholarship, is applied here with dual purpose. First, I use the theory as an explanatory tool to illuminate and interpret themes emerging from the field interviews, and to contrast them with the discourse found in the protocol of the legislative process. Second, I use the theory and its suggested practical implementation to outline PAL, poverty-aware legislation model. This proposal, tentative at this early stage and will be developed in further papers, is intended as a starting point for a rich and important discussion regarding the meaningful inclusion of people in poverty in decision-making on the legislative level. Any attempt at a concrete procedural reform will need to dive deeper into the challenges and complexity of implementing the principles outlined here in the practice of legislative process. This procedural reform suggested is far from minor and by no means easy to implement. However, adopting the paradigm of poverty awareness helps me to articulate why we are obligated to make such efforts. Ultimately, I believe it is possible, necessary, and timely to move from the willfully ignorant legislation promoted by conservative liberal thought to a more empathic legislation that makes laws on the basis of nuanced recognition of the realities of poverty, shaped by the people, for the people.